And Ollie is not with us today, right?
Yeah, Ollie and Beck
are
both excused.
Yeah.
Both with the Social Equity Task Force.
Thanks.
So that said, the lobby is open. Recording has begun. We're ready to go.
Great, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We'll convene the executive management team for Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. Member Ollie Garrett is attending the Social Equity in Cannabis Task Force meeting, but Member Russ Hauge and myself are here. Our first item is approval of minutes from our September 8th, 2021 EMT meeting. We're going to postpone that because Ollie's not here, so we don't have a quorum for on that. Then the next one, though, the October 13th minutes, you and I were both there, so I'll take a motion for that.
I'll move approval of the October 13th EMT minutes.
Great, and I will second that, and so those are approved. And our first staff update today comes from our CFO, Jim Morgan, for an update on the Cannabis Central Reporting System. Hi, Jim.
Hello. Thank you. I'm glad to be here and glad to be able to share our progress on this very important project. In a nutshell, we are moving right along and on track for our scheduled deployment. I'll go into a little bit more detail than that for you. Our go live date is on the calendar for December 6th, and we are making preparations for that, and our preparations have us on track for that. As a steering committee, we have a go, no-go decision point on November 17. At this point, all signs are pointing to that being a go, but that is a week out, so we'll make that decision based on the best information at the time. As I said, all systems are go. We completed our month-long industry testing period in the month of October. We completed that last Thursday, I believe. Very good participation throughout the industry, licensees, integrators, labs. That process by design pointed out a number of issues that have all been addressed. So that process worked as designed. We continue to keep our finger on the pulse of the industry. I was able to meet last week with WACA at their conference. I shared our progress with them, and they are by and large very favorable of what we're doing and where we are in that process. I believe last time I shared some concern that came from the industry of the fact that we're taking ourselves out of business transactions between licensees, and there were some concerns that were shared with us about the impact to licensees that would create, taking a now automated process and creating a manual process for them. My understanding is that there are folks in the industry, integrators that are working together to create an industry-led solution that will provide those business-to-business transactions and automate that. So that issue as a risk has really subsided. It was not made a big point when I met. I also met one-on-one with the WACA board several weeks ago and heard some of their concerns, and that as a broad concern has really subsided. So that's very positive. There was another concern that they raised on the manifesting process and also the manual work that would create. We as a steering committee and as a project team are evaluating some options for that. It's quite possible we're not going to be able to implement any kind of significant change before go live, but we are evaluating solutions that will help resolve that issue. So just to kind of sum things up, we are on track. Things are looking good. Feedback we're getting from the industry is largely positive, and I'll take questions if you have them.
I don't have any questions. I really appreciate the update and the work that's gone into this. It's a big step for the agency and a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just wonder if you heard from industry folks through this process about concerns that when we do go live, that we'll be eagle-eyed looking for the first violation. Somebody mentioned this to me the other day, like, it's almost like a speed trap. Are we setting this up? And is there anything we can do to sort of assure people of our reasonableness on our expectation here?
Yes, and I had a chance to address that. That was one of the questions that I took at the WACA conference.
Oh.
And understandably, there's anxiety about that. And I assured them that our focus is on compliance and helping people become compliant. And we're not going to be out there. And Chandra was on the same panel that I was. She had a different presentation, and she confirmed, that we're not going to be out there with a heavy hand, as is consistent with our overall approach these days. We want to help people get where they need to be. And I did have the opportunity to assure them that that we're not going to be looking to put the hammer down, if they're having a little trouble getting on board.
Yeah, and it sounds like we may still be ironing some things out even after the go live date. So, we'll all need to be a little bit patient and flexible, I think.
Right, and I think as most things, it comes down to the nature of them not complying. Yeah. If they're putting a good faith effort into trying to do what they need to do, then that certainly is very helpful. It is very much in their favor. Yeah,
Russ.
Well, I would just like to state for the record that the purpose for the traceability system as it is evolving, as I understand it, is not to create opportunities for us to enhance our revenue with violations. The idea is to provide a tool that allows the market to function and allows those of us charged with regulation to understand what's going on at the level of the dealer. Or the license holder, I'm sorry. For the record, I have no interest in seeing the first violation. What I hope to see is an explanation of the efforts that we've taken to make this transition smooth.
Very well put. I totally agree. And frankly, that's how we've used traceability up to in my 6-8 months here. We're not hearing cases where people are forgetting to fill some square, but and to what you were just saying, Jim, if we have a case of bales moving out the back door somewhere, that's not about enforcing on our new CCRS. That's the work we do all the time. So I think we're all in agreement there, and we may just have to reassure licensees more as we go forward on that. There'll be anxiety about all of these things, and that's understandable. But I think remember how you put it just right. So let's.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head that our challenge and our effort will be on assuring the industry that that our approach is to help them be in compliance, and we're not out there to be punitive. I believe all of us here are on the same page, and sometimes it still takes a little while to calm the fears of the industry, and we'll make sure that we're focusing on that.
Yeah, great. Okay, good. Thank you. Anything more?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
We will move to a legislative update from Chris Thompson. Chris?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Board Member Hauge, and colleagues. Good to be with you this afternoon. I will touch on a couple of topics briefly. First of all, legislative presentations. We had the opportunity to present quite a lot of information to the House Commerce and Gaming Committee a few weeks back, late October. They asked us to cover a range of topics, and we ended up with half a dozen presenters. It was quite the production. Jillian Schauer has consulted with us on a number of things and now works with CANRA, the National Association of Regulators. So she started off with a presentation she's done at CANRA and elsewhere with kind of the lay of the land with this issue around a novel appearance in marketplaces, regulated and otherwise, of cannabinoids such as Delta-8 and others. She does a really nice job of laying out this issue and brings a really deeply informed national perspective. She has a PhD and a master's in public health. And like I said, has consulted with us, so appeared in a way on our behalf to sort of give that that lay of the land overview on a really critical issue, followed by Justin, who kind of brought that issue home to Washington State and discussed a little bit of what the LCB has been doing and has been through over the past, 6-8 months or so on this. Including now working a bit on a potential agency request legislative proposal. Then I shared with the committee a little bit of the history around changing and refocusing enforcement efforts across the agency, with particularly emphasis on actions the board initiated. So I talked about the rulemaking where, we cut penalties in half and took a number of violations off the table in terms of any potential for license cancellation. A number of other changes there that were driven by and conducted by the board. Also talked about the director's office and a number of initiatives out of the director's office to also move in this direction of a reset and a refocus, where enforcement is primarily about education. And following my piece, Chandra took the mic and shared a lot of good information, data about what's been going on with enforcement activity, not just this year, but going back, so that the committee had a chance to see data about before and after passage of that legislation that made a number of those changes around enforcement. Kendra also provided an update on labs, testing labs, and Jim Morgan finished us out with traceability CCRS progress report for the committee. Very well received. The committee chair unfortunately had to leave before, but she has since had a chance to view a recording of that, and Rick and I had a chance to emphasize some of those key points and answer her questions recently in a meeting directly with her. So that was the House. Fortunately, we also have an invitation from the Senate Policy Committee. This will be next week, to talk about specifically that Delta-8 and other cannabinoids issue. So we're shortly after I get done here with you, I'll be taking a final look at the presentation that Justin and Kathy and Brian Smith have been working on pulling together to complement the presentation that Jillian Schauer will again start us off with, to give that national perspective and health, public health grounded orientation toward this issue. So that'll be on Monday morning. probably around 8:30 or so. The meeting goes from 8 to 10, but if you're interested in looking in on it, we're probably up about 8:30 after they do a hearing on a gaming compact amendment. So legislative presentations have been a focus. We're also working to complete a pair of agency request legislative packages. One on testing labs, and that would be joint with Department of Agriculture. We had a meeting last week with OFM and the governor's staff, as well as the agencies. We're trying to make sure we're really well coordinated with what we're saying in our budget requests, as well as revising some text of the bill. Still going through some potential changes. OFM wanted for the funding for this effort to not have to be every year tucked into a back of the budget amendment and regularize that with a appropriation out of the dedicated marijuana account. So that's the kind of the last area where we're focusing on coming up with some new language, and that should be done shortly. Finally, the LCB is working on an agency request bill about regulation of these cannabinoids that we've been talking about. We are finalizing a budget request. We do anticipate budgetary impact for LCB on the enforcement side, as well as in rulemaking and developing those policies. We also anticipate the State Patrol is projecting impact for their crime lab work, for which they would need new equipment and training and some other things to be equipped to test for a wider range of compounds, and not just the Delta 9 that their current setup is oriented toward. We're in the process of vetting with stakeholders the third draft language of that bill, which we distributed last week, and expect to complete work on this package and submit everything in final form next week. So that's where we are on that. And there are a few other things going here and there legislatively, but those are the highlights. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions or any feedback for me.
Only just again as a reminder that we do need the board to be briefed on our agency request legislation, particularly the cannabinoid one, which has evolved as we've discussed it. So, you know, we don't have, well, anyhow, we'll find a time to do that as soon as we can, because if you're going to be submitting them next week, it would be good for the board to have that briefing soon.
Absolutely. I'm just, in fact, today getting more questions about this from Department of Agriculture, and we haven't yet completed the work on the budget stuff. So I think once we know what we want to request, that's when we want to connect with the board members as soon as possible. So we'll aim to do that before, you know, I click send on anything with OFM.
That'd be great. Okay. Any question, Russ?
No, Chris, I'm very happy with the level of information you're providing to us about what's going on. I know this is a really busy time, and I'm standing by. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And we will move to enforcement and education with Director Chandra Brady. Morning, afternoon.
Afternoon, Board Chair Postman and Board Member Hauge. Dustin is going to drive again for me today. Thank you. Just an overview really quickly of what you'll hear about today, all the work that's happening in Enforcement and Education Division and the work we're doing with other folks as well. Starting out with the education we provided, as you can see, those numbers are staying pretty steady right under the 2,000 contacts mark, 271 hours of education. I've done some work this month. I did it to share at WACA, and I'll likely do it next month to share with this group. to look at the percentages because we have a different number of licensees in each of those industries. And so you can see that while 238 contacts for education in 70 hours looks substantially lower than the liquor unit, there's a remarkable higher number of licensees there in liquor than there is in cannabis, just as an example. But there's a lot of education going on. The topics for those educations, next slide, as you can see, vary, with 56% of them being related to public safety. A lot of conversations about how to comply with COVID-19, as we would expect. But what I like to see on these topics is some of our high priority issues, right? And so we're seeing youth access to liquor, public safety over service, and just general public safety. So I like that we're out there having conversations about our priorities when we're talking to the licensees. We'll look specifically at complaints that were received by the Enforcement Education Division. We had 442 complaints, 77% of those related to COVID. I'm hesitant to say this out loud, but both the overall number and the percentage related to COVID are starting to decline again. I think a lot of this is related to the public's understanding and knowledge about exactly what the restrictions are at any given time. And so we receive some complaints, obviously, that are founded and require education or even enforcement in some situations when folks aren't on the path to compliance. But a lot of times we receive complaints that 16 months ago might have been a valid violation or complaint, but at this time the licensee wasn't actually doing anything that was in violation of the mandate. We're still dealing with COVID-19 complaints as the #1 complaint. 23 of our complaints were against folks within the cannabis industry, 390 against folks within the liquor industry, and 29 in tobacco vapor. Just a breakdown and a comparison so you can see how the number of complaints per month has progressed over time. We had 23 complaints in cannabis. I pulled those up because that was a substantial jump when you start to look at the data, and a number of those are related to youth access. That was not part of my presentation. And liquor complaints stayed pretty steady at 58. Again, these do not include COVID complaints. These are the non-COVID complaints. And then next, the tobacco vapor complaints came in at 26. Everything's staying fairly steady, although we'll see an incline in complaints, education, and AVNs as we restarted our compliance checks, just to give you a heads up on that. When we compare our total complaints received, again, to the percentage of those that are related to COVID, and this is just a visual management opportunity, you can see that the COVID complaints are again coming down, and they're at 75%, which is still a large number of the complaints our officers are out there dealing with. AVNs stayed pretty consistent from last month. And I did pull up the total, what the actual violations were for, like I said earlier, and those are predominantly related to service to youth, getting out there with our compliance checks again.
Was July when we restarted those?
The end of June, yes.
Oh,
so
okay.
Actually,
yeah.
June,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Right. Okay, I see.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. And I've been watching that. And so what we're hoping to see and what we expect to see and what we are seeing is that as our compliance rates go up, our AVN numbers will go down for those youth access violations. So here we're going to look at how we resolve some of those within the unit. And so 19 of the AVNs that we dealt with in liquor for the month were paid uncontested. 33 of those were resolved at informal hearing, and none of those felt that they needed to go forward to formal hearing from informal. In liquor. In cannabis, we had 3 resolve uncontested paid, 7 resolve at informal, and that's the purple line, October. The gray line you're seeing is an average, so that's not something current, that's from over time. It's a 12-month average. And then I believe next we'll talk about compliance checks. So you can see that the numbers for compliance checks for October were pretty consistent with September. The compliance rate came down a little bit and the number of checks went up a little bit. We also had some delivery compliance checks with that, and those are starting to look a little bit better. And we're having a lot of meetings with some industry reps. Licensing and I have met with industry reps to talk about how we can do better in that area. And our officers are out there doing education for how to check IDs and how to make your policies such that you can prevent youth access, and what kind of tools and resources are available to licensees to make that happen. That's in the liquor industry. Next, in the cannabis industry, they're staying pretty solid at 94, 96% over the last 2 months. And that's even with a greatly increased number of checks. So that tells us that that's a pretty good representation of what's actually happening out there in the industry. So again, Jim mentioned, Director Morgan mentioned that we presented to WACA last week, and that was one of the things that we complimented the industry on, is their pre-COVID and post-COVID compliance rates have been fairly consistent. And tobacco and vapor is down to 68 in October. So we are working in the education arena, and again, just getting out there and offering courses and education to licensees about our enforcement officers will go do classes with their licensee employees and offer to do that. So that's one of the resources that is available for folks in the industry that want to help us improve reduction of youth access. Just to give you an idea of the number of checks that our officers are out there doing, you can see that it's a lot, 2,122 checks in liquor premises for the month of October. And in cannabis, 238. And for tobacco vapor, 355. And that's been pretty consistent through COVID, as you can see, and they're doing a great job staying visible and connected with our licensees. Some new slides, just a little bit of information about some of the different work that's going on in the division. I'm trying to do some of this each month. This is our policy work that we're doing. You'll see the big first quarter, quarter 3 of fiscal year 2021, we had 17, and that was just to be prepared for the legislative law changes. So next slide. You can see the large list of stuff. The highlighted in blue there is our policy changes related to the law enforcement legislative changes. Do you want me to take your question now, Russ?
Yeah, I would appreciate it. It relates to that graph you showed of the number of premise visits in vapor shops. And that's the place where we have the biggest issue with compliance, right?
That is a place where, yes, where you're hearing
the lowest rate of compliance with the legal bar selling tobacco products to people under the age of 18, right?
Yes.
Okay. Why are the premise checks going down consistently?
So they did an increased number of premise checks in October, and this is a combination of tobacco vapor. One of the impacts that we're dealing with right now.
I'm sorry, that's my question. The graph you're showing here, the previous one showed that the compliance rate for these kinds of shops is bad compared to the other compliance rates like cannabis. And yet we have a decline since May of 20 to now October of 21 overall. I mean, the trend line is very clear. Is that something due to our staffing, or is it an enforcement priority?
So we are dealing with the impacts of staffing in different areas, and in units like our vapor unit, where the number of staff in the unit is pretty low to start with, then when we have staffing impacts, it really impacts our ability to get out there. As you can see, they got out to still over 350 locations across the state. So
no question that if you're working with less than a full toolbox, this is good performance. And, you know, it points out, I think, a need that we have in this area of enforcement, given the low compliance rate.
yeah, we have 31 vacancies right now.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. Next slide. Thanks, Dustin. Next slide. This is a summary of some of our policy considerations that we took into account, especially considering many of the changes that we made to our training to enhance our training, make some of the changes that were implemented by the legislature. And I'm going to go to the next slide. And we'll just finish off here. I just want to highlight how well licensing and communications and specifically Director Morgan's team have been working together. They've been doing training and collaborative meetings together, which has been very beneficial for the agency and the industry. We've been working more on division and agency strategic planning. And then just yesterday, we had a communication and education workshop, so we can focus on how we can best communicate to the industry, the public, and our staff about changes that are happening. And then I got into the field twice and went over to Pasco and down to Vancouver, which were both great visits out into the field to see the work that our staff are doing. So I'll end there. I know I have a couple more slides, but in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, Russ, for Chandra? I don't either. I will reserve my questions. Thank you for this. Appreciate it, as always. We'll move to communications and media. There's Communications Director Brian Smith.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman, Member Hauge. I'll be brief here. I'll cover some of the things that from a communication standpoint that you've already heard from some of the other members, but is very important, namely with the CCRS. You heard Jim say that we're a month out from that. Myself and my team have been working, I think, pretty well with the subject matter experts on the team to make sure that we're getting out the right kind of communications to the licensees and the integrators and the labs and all the different stakeholders based on what they need. We maintain an email box that sends everything pretty much through us relating to general questions that we feed through the subject matter experts that have already been set up, and then that's posted typically to the FAQs that we run on the CCRS web page of our website, as well as feed the webinar questions and address them live, and we can point people there or respond to them directly when they have something very specific. We put out regular messages with regards to the milestones you might have seen last week, so that we are continuing to build awareness about what they should be doing at this time and the deadlines that we have coming up. Kendra, in response to a question from an integrator, recently put together a quick start. So imagine, just what you need to be able to make sure that you are ready, either as an integrator, as a licensee, that we'll be sending out likely later today or by Friday morning, with tomorrow being the holiday. So I thought that was a valuable thing. The feedback that we're getting is that people are generally getting, if they're responding at all, what they need. You always worry, I think, when you have a lot of people who aren't acting, even though we don't necessarily need them at this point, as to what they do know and what they're going to be needing at the end. We're geared up on our team to make it the #1 priority going into the final month to make sure we're churning out the information that's necessary. So we're all aware of it. I think things are going well there, and with Jim's leadership, as you heard, we seem to be doing quite well with this thing. Let's hope it continues. You heard Chris say too about the ledge presentations. I'm always involved with that with the other members that are there, and I think we're close there on the Senate for Monday. we're looking ahead. We had a discussion yesterday about anticipating the recommendations from the Social Equity and Cannabis Task Force. That's something that's going to be significant, I think, as far as a communications role. We'll be talking internally as we know more about what to expect and how we might be able to provide and what kind of information, I guess, we're going to need and what it is that we'll need to be able to say about that. But I'm anticipating as well that we'll have a quality role there so that the folks know what it is that they're going to need. And there's going to be a lot of different audiences, I think, on that. Those people that want to be able to find out what we're going to do to make licenses available to the media, to legislators, all that kind of stuff. And we'll be prepared. I'll be the lead on that and ready to roll as soon as we can. We're planning to be proactive. We put out the newsletter. You might have remembered that on a quarterly basis, we issue the newsletter to the cannabis industries as well as the alcohol industries. We retired the former platform, and we've been searching high and low for a good alternative that's going to give us something very graphic, supports media, that type of thing that would be easy to read. That's what you want in a newsletter. Is you want, I always say it's something that I can sit and eat a bowl of cereal and want to read, you know, about a topic that I might not normally read about. That's what we want to be able to provide. And so I think we're going to go with a product, David, you might be familiar with as Medium, which is something that the governor has used in their office. And in our poking around and all the alternatives we have, we've established a Medium page and got the basics going on that. So more to come, and folks will hear more about that, but I think it's going to be a good solution for us. And then the annual report is in the works. So remember, that's from July of 2020 through June 30 of this year. And so my team helps coordinate the information that comes in, as well as writing a lot of original content. Julie Graham's going to be the lead on that, but we all play a role, including what the board's focus is and the board's message, et cetera, on that. On the media front, you've heard me say that we always have a steady kind of come in. I think it's been of late, it's been intermittent, and we'll have some issues that pop up. The COVID and the mask wearing was an issue over in Tri-Cities a few weeks ago. And once you have that, you'll often just have a spurt. And every news organization in town, from the TV to the radio to the newspapers, calling you. We had something like that. We had a recent inquiry from the Seattle Times based on a report from Leafly that kind of looked at all the states that have legalized and the data that they had and made some projections about what's needed, et cetera. They took some issue, Leafly did, with how we collect the data. I can tell you that the problem wasn't really how we collect the data. It was they had a problem that it didn't fit into the type of data that they wanted to be able to have. And so we talked with Leafly, spent some time earlier with them, and then later at the Seattle Times. And we were very responsive, a lot of back and forth. But in the end, if you saw that article a week ago or so, it was, it was fine. It was informative. It basically said Washington, the cannabis is the #4 crop in Washington State. And then I guess that's it. I mean, I've got a guy from the Walla Walla Union Bulletin that's blowing up my phone as I speak right now. I can see that wants to talk about. There were the issues with some licensees over in Walla Walla area, which the board is familiar with, that we're over canopy, and we're overseeing a controlled burn that's going on over there with some questions. But overall, it's not been a steady rollout of media, which is what we've had for years. But lately, it's been kind of quiet for a few days, and then something will pop up. So that's all that I have. Are there any questions?
Russ, go ahead.
That quick start guide that you said Kendra was preparing, can you drop a copy to me? I'd like to see what's out there in terms of available.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And then, Brian, the only thing on CCRS, you heard the conversation with Jim. Would you just think about whether there's a place in the communication between now and go live that addresses this anxiety among licensees that we're going to be looking for missed dotted I's and crossed T's and things of that sort of. You could just transcribe some of Russ's comments about how we use traceability. I mean, I think we just want to, it'd be nice if we could try to reassure people a little bit and also explain how it is used today. You know,
Absolutely. I made a note of it already.
Cudgel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read
Okay.
between the lines there. Thank you.
Cool. Figured you would. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Next, Tony Hood, our Deputy Director, will give us a general agency update. Hello, Tony.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman and Member Hauge. I'm going to start off with a meeting that our facilities manager, our risk manager, Matt Hansen, had with the City of Olympia. This just happened 2 days ago. It was open to members of the community, and Matt attended on our behalf. There is a piece of property that the City of Olympia purchased. It used to be where the Quality Inn was, near the freeway. It's about 2 blocks from here. It is now going to be moved into a low barrier shelter, homeless shelter. So the City of Olympia purchased that property, and they have said within the next 4 months, there will be the low barrier shelter opening. And low barrier means basically everyone can be there. There are no restrictions, including unregistered sex offenders. They can be there as well. We coincidentally, we recently put out a reminder to our staff to be aware of their surroundings, as it's darker when some staff are arriving to the headquarters building. We will continue to point out safety tips as the winter months continue, and we'll continue to assess the situation whenever the homeless camp opens up. I don't have a lot more details about it, except that's the timeline right now. There are several members of the neighborhood that aren't happy. As you know, there's a school across the street, which isn't terribly happy, but it sounds like the City of Olympia is firm on their plan going forward.
Yeah.
You know,
My regular route home down past the railroad tracks and under the overpass tells me that the community that we're afraid of is there now. And right. Maybe this will give us a way to identify and manage that risk.
And that somebody made that point in one of our meetings just the other day, Tony, when this issue came up, that you know, it doesn't mean there's not a problem if they don't move into the hotel, but you know, they deserve some humanity, and this hopefully allows access to some support, some control, even though it is a sort of low to zero barrier entry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, the hotel isn't there anymore. It's just a vacant lot. Okay.
Yes. Yep. We don't know what to call it. Camp or encampment or place or whatever, but
yes. And I'm not sure anything further about the logistics, but we'll keep you updated. And Matt Hansen is staying connected with that.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So the next item I have is our SMP project, which is our system modernization project. It's also called LEADS internally. At this time, we are starting the readiness portion of that project. So we're not kicking off the project yet, but we're working on some prep work. I'm the executive sponsor of that project, and we are reaching out to directors because we do need some of their resources from their subject matter experts to get ready for the RFP, assuming that we are in the governor's budget for the requested amount in the decision package. So we are working on that. We're also working on a strong governance document so that we can be very clear when we kick off the project where decisions should be made, who has authority to make decisions, and what needs to be elevated to the steering committee. And equally as important, what does not need to be elevated to the steering committee, so that we can have sufficient progress in that within the amount of time that we need to make it happen. I've had a great time getting to know Glenda, who's leading the readiness from our IT, and she's been extremely helpful. The third item I have is that Director Bingham from our HR and Director Garza and I have been working with our new DEI manager on our diversity plan. We are working on his PDP, his expectations, and we have some plans already in place that we would like him to work on expanding and implementing. Anita did quite a bit of work before we hired the DEI manager, And also our former HR director did quite a bit of work as well. The four of us, or the three of us, met with Dr. Johnson as well this week from the Office of Equity, and we will continue to meet with her every 2 months approximately to touch base and to explain to her what we're doing and reach out for resources and share knowledge, and we look forward to those meetings. I had never met her before this week, and I really enjoyed it. As was previously mentioned, we are in the midst of our agency strategic planning. We had a meeting a week ago that went very well, and we will continue that meeting at the beginning of December. This is not a new agency strategic plan, but rather a refresh of our 5-year plan, making sure that we're on track to meet our strategies and have reportable outcomes. The fifth thing I have is that I also did a ride-along like Chair Postman did over the past month. I went out with 2 liquor enforcement officers. It was very educational for me, and I was extremely impressed with how personable they are and how well they relate to licensees. They both did an excellent job. The licensees that we stopped by and visited all recognized them, or most of them recognized them. They had a working relationship, and there was a very easy discussion between them. There wasn't tension, and I really appreciated seeing that. We went to places that were completely empty and some places that were totally packed. And I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, but it was very informative for me, and I'm glad I went. And the last thing that I have is that we continue to participate in events that involve other state agencies, and specifically, I mean, the Combined Fund Drive is going on right now. It's a little bit difficult given the amount of non-enforcement staff that we have working remotely to get people excited, but we did have a great auction of several baskets. And I think we raised almost $2,000 from those baskets, and we continue to have fundraisers and participate with other state agencies to raise money for worthy causes. And that's all I have, unless you have questions for me.
Great, none for me. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And then to wrap it up, Rick Garza, our director for a general agency update. Director's comments.
Good afternoon. Can you see me?
No.
Oh.
I hear you.
What have I done? Well, I don't know. I've got the video on. Not sure what's going on.
There you go. Looked like you're about to come. There you go. No.
Am I there?
No.
Huh.
You got bigger, but I still don't see you.
All right. I'm just going to go audio then.
That's fine. Go ahead. Thank you.
Chair Postman, Board Member Hauge, I'll try to, I think I've only got a few minutes here, but you've heard a lot, and it's been since the 13th that we were together with you to just kind of share the priorities of the agency. Very quickly, David, you were able to join us for our strategic planning session on November 1st, and that was Russ looking at our 2019-2024 plan, which is the 5-year plan. It was really an update to the objectives and initiatives and strategies that we put in place several years ago. But frankly, because of COVID, we just haven't had a chance to really open it up and look at it. And so we did one session. I think we got through 2 of the 4 goals that we have in our strategic plan, and we'll be doing another session for those 2. And then David will be present with those, and then we'll bring those back to the board to really just kind of walk through them with you, get your feedback before we do any final action plans on that. And as you heard, Chandra, they're already working on some of those action plans right now. But I just wanted to share with you that's an effort that we've begun again. And then the DEI manager, Jim Weatherly, and I thought Tony did a nice update of really great to have Jim here. If you haven't met him, he's just a remarkable guy. And you know, just a small world, because Dr. Johnson, who's the director of the new Governor's Equity Office, was actually a mentor to Jim, and they worked together at DSHS several years ago. So it's great to have Jim on board. The idea too, so you know, that we met and talked about yesterday was to put a webinar together for our entire agency. And that would give us an opportunity in the next month, month and a half, once Jim's kind of got his feet wet, understands our agency a little bit better, because we've gotten questions when I've gone to division meetings about, Rick, tell us about what's going on with DEI and the new manager. So I think we'll do a webinar, and it'll give us an opportunity to kind of share the priorities, kind of the work that Jim's going to be working on the next 3, 6 to 9 months. So I'll make sure, obviously, that you have an opportunity. Well, I'll have to figure out a way for you to have an opportunity. Maybe we'll just have Jim come into an EMT and give you the same update. But just excited to have Jim here with us. And then Chris talked about a lot of legislative meetings. And I want to commend the staff, because the meeting with the House Commerce and Labor back on the 21st went very well. I think bringing Jillian Shower in to give an overview was terrific. And then, of course, Chris, Chandra, Kendra, and Jim did a great job. And I had a lot of good comments from the chair in a subsequent meeting, as Chris shared, about the information that we shared. And then last week, just so you're aware, myself and Chandra, Jim, and Becky went to WACA. We had about an hour and a half. I had a 30-minute presentation of just overview of agency activity. And then they specifically went into the kind of the 3 areas that we discussed before the Senate committee or the House committee. I just thought they did a really great job. And it was obvious. It was really good to see. There were 4 or 5 licensees that got up after the presentation to share experiences that they're having in licensing and with enforcement, the kind of collaboration, education, compliance. They had a lot of really good things to say. Just want you to be aware of that. It's very consistent with what you're hearing that Chris shared with the committee and that Chandra shared with the committee, and then with one of the trade associations. So really good feedback there. You know, sometimes we get stuck in our divisions and we silo ourselves. And I've seen that experience as director for 9 years. Something that Chandra and others have said, you know, the 3 legs of the stool of our regulatory work is really licensing, enforcement, and finance. We collect the taxes and fees of all these 4 commodities, or at least 3 of them. And so I've really seen a concerted effort, collaboration between those 3 divisions to work more closely together. It shows. I'm hearing it out there from the community that we regulate. I'm hearing it from staff. It's not that it wasn't there, but there's an effort, I can see it, to make sure that people are communicating. And then you got to bring Brian and the communications team in. They're working very closely with them. So remember, when there was criticism of our agency, whether it was a licensing, enforcement, or the director's office, it was because we weren't communicating uniformly and consistently within the agency and outside the agency. And I've just seen the last 6 months and a year that has changed dramatically, and it just looks good. It feels good, and I just want to share that with you, because I think it's exactly where we want to go as an agency. And then, you know, of course, you got Kathy and the team that's doing the rulemaking that you work with, you know, weekly. That has changed the way that we do rules. David was just talking about this with a legislator yesterday about the fact that we used to have public hearings on our CR 102, and it would go on and on. We have very few people that come because the kind of collaboration that we need with our licensees, public health, prevention, everyone, is occurring through that process. And people are feeling heard, because if they didn't, they'd come to those public hearings and they demand that things would change. And be honest with you, that's the past that we had 3 and 4 years ago. But Kathy's taken us to a different level, and Justin and the team, with respect to how we do policy and rules work. So I don't know that I can go, I don't know how I'm doing with time. Just another example, the homeless site that was just spoken of. We've got other agencies with us in that area where we're at. We've got Alfie Alvarado Ramos, who's the Director of Veteran Affairs, and then the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges. Just so you're aware, a couple of months ago, we had a quick discussion about doing everything we can as agencies of our governor and of the state to do whatever we could to help with that homeless site, and you know, not have the kind of reaction that some people have, as if you said, Russ, that doesn't exist. We've got to do something to try to help these folks. And just so you're aware, it's not just our agency, but others on that whole side are working together to make sure that we bring, we bring that home to them. The governor has an annual lean conference. He does opening remarks, and believe it or not, maybe no surprise, we were one of 3 agencies that were recognized by the governor directly. We had done an effort in licensing that we were so proud of that Becky had done around design thinking. And what that means very briefly is, and I remember bringing this to you for discussion so you were aware, instead of just assuming we were doing this process of licensing correct, we went out to the stakeholders to ask them, if you were going to change this or do something different, what would it look like? And I mean, they went into some detail and made some changes, and the governor recognized our staff in his opening remarks at the annual Lean conference. And I want to thank Edmund, because our Lean person was the one that suggested it to the governor's staff, and we got mentioned. So it was kind of cool to hear and see. And so, Chair Postman, I think I'm going over, so I'm going to stop there and take any questions you might have. And sorry, my video isn't working.
It's all right. You're not going over, but we appreciate the timely message anyhow. Russ, any questions or comments for Rick?
No,
yeah, I had one, and now I'm trying to remember what. Oh, I just want to say one thing about the communications piece of this, Rick, which I totally agree with what you were saying. And the thing is, when we talk about communications and working with our communications team, it's not, sometimes that gets a bad name. It's like PR and spin. Sometimes just the opposite. It's about them helping us say things in the clearest possible way and to the broadest possible audience. And it really does show in some of those examples you're giving. And CCRS is a perfect example. The user's guide, those things. And so I'm really glad that directors reach out to Brian and his team as often as they do, and that collaboration exists like that we embrace it. It's just about telling the people who we work for what we're doing and what they need to know in order to be successful if they're a licensee. So appreciate that. And with that, I always give a chance for any additional team updates if we missed anything or anybody has anything to add from the staff team. And nobody ever does. Russ, any last thoughts? No? Okay. Me neither. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the work of the directors for this and all of the staff. So have a great rest of your day.